I'm waiting. Okay. Yes, sir.
Sure. I'm on time and we're still late.
Okay. I'd like to call the City of Placerville Planning Commission regular meeting of July 16th, 2013 to order. And Commissioner Friend, why don't you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
My pleasure, Mr. Chair. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call, please?
Vice Chair Russell.
Here.
Member Lowry.
Here.
Chair Briggs.
Here.
Member Friend.
Here.
Member Drobish.
Here.
All right, on to the consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered routine and will be enacted by general consent unless any commissioner requests a roll call vote or unless any member of the commission or staff wishes to remove an item for discussion. The reading of the full text of all resolutions will be waived unless a commission member requests otherwise. Do I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull the minutes of July 2nd, please.
Okay, we'll pull the minutes of July 2nd. Do I have a motion to adopt the rest of the agenda?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Commissioner Friend.
Yes, with regards to the item 7.1, 2790 Clay Street, I don't have a correction in the minutes. I want to point out for the public record that this project was within 500 feet of my residence, and that condition wasn't known to me at the time that we heard and took action on this. For the record, I want to state that the proximity of that project to my residence has no bearing on the vote that I took at our last meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner. And
Move to adopt the minutes as presented.
do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, let's move on to items 4. We already did item 4. Item 5, these are items of interest to the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter not on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. State law prohibits the commission from acting on items not listed on the agenda except by special action of the Planning Commission under specified circumstances. The chair reserves the right to limit the speaker's time to 3 minutes. The chair will recognize the speaker and ask that they state their name for the record. Personal attacks on individuals or comments which are slanderous or which may invade an individual's personal privacy will not be tolerated. Do we have any items of interest from the public? Seeing none, we will close item 5 and move on to item 6, communications. Do we have communications from staff?
There were 2 communications that I provided to you prior to the conduction of business tonight. One is some amendments to the conditions of approval for the first item before you this evening. Those were made yesterday, Monday of this week, after consultation with the applicant as well as City Engineer Stong. Those changes are shown as strikeout and underlined, and a copy is available here for members of the public if they wish to look at those. The other item is a kind of a housekeeping item. I meant to give you the amended bylaws that this commission has adopted in March of this year.
Thank you. All right, we are now going to move to the public hearing section, beginning with item 7.1, which is 801 Moray Drive, Glen Moray Bed and Breakfast, Conditional Use Permit 2001-03. Do we have a staff report?
We do. This is a request by property owner Maggie Smith to amend Conditional Use Permit 2001-03 to increase the number of beds in the Glen Moray Bed and Breakfast business at 801 Moray Drive from 3 beds to 5. The applicant is Allison and Tom Loprich. They are proprietors of the bed and breakfast establishment. The site is located within the Coloma Street, Spring Street Residential Historic District. The project size or site is approximately 1.6 acres, has a zoning and land use designation of residential with single-family zoning with 6,000 square foot minimum lot. The site is surrounded by residential uses as well as US 50 to the south. There are a large number of mature pines, oaks, and other hardwood trees on the site. The access to the site is via High and Wood Streets, which is west of the intersection of Coloma and Wood Street, north of US 50. The site contains a historic structure, dates back to the middle of the 19th century. It's the Henry S. Morey House. The property's been built out over time, and that is described on page 2 of the staff report. Additional improvements on the site include, at the time, what was called a granny flat. We now consider them secondary dwelling units. That unit was established by permit and was completed, final, and inspected in 2003. The property owner, Maggie Smith, lives in that dwelling. The Lopritch family live inside the Morey house. The Lopritch family is they are proposing to build a 2-story addition to the Morey structure attached by a covered, I guess I would call it a corridor. The purpose for this improvement is the Lopritch family is growing in number, and they're growing larger, and they need additional space in which to reside. What this will do upon completion of this structure is that they intend to vacate 2 of the rooms inside the Morey house, which would then be available with amendment to this use permit to offer for let or rent as a bed and breakfast accommodation. The exterior improvements would typically trigger what's called historic district review, which would be subject to the Planning Commission's review and approval. However, because the improvements are located in such a location on the site that is not visible from the street, which is one of the characteristics and criteria that it cannot be seen from the 3 major roadways that surround the site, be it US 50, Spring Street, or Wood Street. Therefore, the elevations proposed for this new structure are not subject to review by the Commission. The Commission is solely to review the conditional use permit and modification request tonight. In terms of the Historical Advisory Committee did hear this request earlier. Bear with me one second. On June 20th of this year, they did recommend approval of the request as submitted. The request was analyzed for impacts to the environment and was determined to be categorically exempt from CEQA pursuant to 15301, in that the project would involve negligible increases or impacts to the environment due to the expansion of the number of rooms inside the existing structure. In terms of public noticing, this project was noticed appropriately to our city standards and state law. No comments have been received as of the date of this report and at this moment. In terms of analysis with the general plan and zoning ordinance, I want to draw attention to one goal and one policy within the land use element of the general plan, which really speaks to this type of request. I will quote under Goal C, to protect and provide for the expansion of Placerville's commercial services sector to meet the needs of both Placerville area residents and visitors. Under Policy 3, the city shall promote the retention and expansion of commercial businesses already located in Placerville. The Glen Morey Bed and Breakfast establishment is clearly a business that has been established here within the city. As I mentioned in the staff report, the city has received and actually has seen a reduction in the number of bed and breakfasts that had existed within the city. In fact, 3 have closed during the economic downturn that we've had over the last few years. This request tonight would actually expand the number of accommodation beds for our guests as well as family who may need a place to accommodate while they're visiting our fair city. Staff therefore encourages this particular request as it would expand the number of beds, as I mentioned. Now, under the zoning ordinance, there's a specific section describing bed and breakfast establishments, and that's section 10-4-11. This section outlines specific criteria that must be analyzed and reviewed before the Planning Commission can approve a bed and breakfast use within the city. It is public record that in 2001, these same criteria were in effect, and the Planning Commission considered those criteria when it approved the conditional use permit in 2001 for the 3-bedroom bed and breakfast. Drawing attention to tonight's request, the parking criteria would be the only criteria that from staff's perspective, that would need to be reviewed and scrutinized by the Planning Commission. However, the applicant is providing the number of parking stalls required under that parking criteria, which under section 10411C, number 2, 2 parking stalls are required plus 1 additional parking space per rented room must be provided. The applicant's site plan, which is on the wall behind you and part of your packet, clearly shows that there are 7 parking stalls provided on site, 4 of which are angled and 3 of which are parallel stalls. I mentioned the amendments to the conditional, the conditions of approval by City Engineer Stong. I will conclude that, again, the overnight accommodation opportunities have been decreasing over the years. This would actually increase the number. It certainly should be supported, consistent with Goal C and Policy 3 of the land use element. Staff therefore recommends that the Planning Commission adopt the staff report as part of the public record, make the findings of fact, including Roman numeral 2C, that the project is exempt from environmental review, and approve the amendment to the use permit with by reaffirming the conditions from 2001 and the addition of conditions 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 as amended. The applicant is in the audience this evening, Mr. Chairman, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Painter. Do we have any questions of staff?
As loath as I am to get involved in mathematical word problems, I'm going to risk humiliation here. And we have a revised page 5, and the item 11, you can see the change in the math from $3,000 to $1,500. Item 12, I see a change in the occupancy factor, but I don't see a change in the fee. So
that was just a typo. Originally, the occupancy was 50%, and I changed the bottom line, but not the 50% to 25%. So it was an earlier change to the occupancy that I didn't.
So I got the math right then.
You did.
Oh man, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Mr. Friend?
So let me qualify in advance that my questions, while probing, should not be interpreted as being opposed to the project. Is the Maury House in the inventory?
Yes.
I know it's in the district, but it's not
Yes,
in the
it is.
inventory. Okay. And I missed that, so at least we think along the same lines. I realize that from a technical perspective, and this is really to staff now, I realize from a technical perspective, this is not subject to Planning Commission review as far as the building permit, that our purview is strictly limited to the CUP. But it seems somewhat technical in nature in that not only the topography, but because there are some trees that are blocking the view. If those trees weren't there, then in fact it would be visible, right? And so to take a different perspective, if somebody had a structure in the historic district, like the little building by C&H that's no longer there, that got torn down without anybody having any say in it, and Pierre, you may recall that when that happened, I mean, frankly, somebody could have put up some sort of shielding of some kind, mature trees or whatever, and then had their way with the building, and we technically would not have any purview over it. And so, I'm wondering, with something that's in the inventory and something that clearly has some history, is outlined in the staff report, is there any discussion or information regarding the architectural compatibility of the new structure with the existing? Even if it's not in our purview, it would be nice to have some comfort level with that, number one. And then number two, perhaps we ought to review the technical prohibitions against having some say on structures such as this in districts such as this, because it seems that it's important. I mean, theoretically, a super ultra modern, I'll use the word incompatible, but that's not meant to be a negative, but certainly a totally unrelated architectural structure could be built, and there'd be no input from the commission whatsoever. It would be de facto, they'd have the right to do it. Again, I'm not opposed to the project. I'm really kind of raising this more in kind of a general perspective, and I'd like to get staff's input on that.
Sure. My opinion of the proposed structure that would be attached to the Maury house, its architecture, its massing is very similar in size to the Maury structure in terms of peak roof height. Okay, it's almost the same. The Maury house, though, is a single level structure where you actually take steps up, so it's a raised foundation. So there's that difference. However, windows that are proposed are very similar to the ones that are in and installed currently within the Maury structure. The siding is very similar too. And one of the characteristics, if you look at the Secretary of Interior standards, is that additions to or new construction that is attached to a historic structure, the guidelines encourage that new construction, that if it were to be removed, it wouldn't affect the historic character of the historic fabric of the building, because it would go away. And in this sense, because of where it sits, it's attached only by a corridor. It is not an entire wall addition. So one could make a finding from that sense that the proposed improvements, if removed at some time in the future, would not affect the historic aspects of the house, or the historical portions of the house that have been built out over time.
Okay, so if I can synthesize from that, and I appreciate that, Andrew, that basically you're saying from staff's perspective, on balance, the architecture, design, and materials that are proposed are in fact fairly similar to what's already existing there. Okay, and that's great.
I'd agree.
That's comforting. Now, you also referenced the Secretary of Interior's design standards for historic districts, right?
As
now,
we would be evaluating such a request.
Yeah,
pursuant to
so
that.
again, it's a question for staff, because this is kind of still fairly new for me in terms of having to reference that document and what that document kind of sets forth. So even though the city has its parameters as indicated in the staff report on what, page 2 is it? Under historic resource regulations. How does the Secretary of the Interior's guideline document relate to this? Is it also acknowledge the restriction of not being visible from public roadways, or is it strictly dealing with historic structures in isolation?
I don't believe they distinguish between the visibility of the improvements that may be proposed or alterations to historic fabric of a building. The city's code, however, does specify that only those improvements or alterations that are visible from the street are subject to that criteria and guidelines. Guidelines is the key word here. Those are Secretary of Interior guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm slightly unsettled, if you
No,
don't.
I ended up, as I was reviewing this project, looking over those guidelines because I had similar questions and concerns. And I think it's been a while since we've gone over them. So for me, it was actually a very good refresher, because I had the same sort of thought about, modern architecture versus trying to make it, as they talked about in one of our workshops on it, about a Disneyland feel, faux historic. So it might be good to review those, but I want to follow up on you're asking about with the trees. So if the trees aren't there, then there's an issue. The aesthetics are changed. So do we have the authority as a condition to make some type of restriction or prohibition on maintaining that landscaping, or preventing them from being removed?
Well, it's certainly not a subject that's on the agenda this evening. The conditional use is for the operation of the bed and breakfast. And you've read the conditions from 2001, there are no conditions that specify the maintenance of and the maintaining of the mature trees that are on the premises. So
That was a
understand
weaker commission back then.
well, I understand your question. I guess I'm responding in a more of a factual manner, but I certainly understand what you're getting at. I don't know at this point whether or not this particular meeting would be the time to discuss that particular issue. That it almost sounds as if perhaps some changes to the code upon reviewing these types of requests might be warranted, at least to.
I think that's indirectly, that's kind of what I'm suggesting, that maybe when staff has extra time and extra staff, that we might look at that. It was a little bit unsettling. Again, no, in all deference to the applicant, not speaking specific to your project, this is more of a general, broader thing. It just struck me that could happen just based on the simple technicality, and this structure seemed to have a very rich history, and one that we would want to not only preserve, but also maximize. So that's where I was coming from.
If I could follow up on what Mr. Painter had said, we had actually a very lengthy discussion on that issue, and there were two sections of the code that seemed to have somewhat of a conflict. One section of the code said that if it's on this inventory, whatever, it shall comply with these historic standards, but then there's this other section that basically said that only if visible from a street. And we talked about the vegetation. It was actually Mr. Painter said, well, what if all the vegetation's gone? And it's true. It's very mature vegetation, large trees. What if a new owner came in and decided, I want a whole new look? They could take everything out. Then it's visible. Well, then the impact, or the opposite of what was the intent of the code would be realized. And so we talked about that, and that's one of the reasons why staff decided to give you the elevation, so that you would at least have those and have a comfort level that, from staff's perspective, that there was a compatibility with what they were proposing with the existing structure. But as Mr. Painter pointed out, this probably is something where maybe we could come back with a closer look at that section of the code to where if the building could be visible, if the vegetation were removed, that we're not going to consider that an ultimate barrier, because it's not. It's ephemeral.
If that were to occur, would it then be considered a non-conforming use that would be subject to code enforcement and potentially revoke the use permit?
No.
No, I would say it would be a
It's
legal non-conforming
Right.
use, and
Got
they'd
it.
be fine, but then any later modifications of the building then would be subject to the code.
Okay.
But that was very astute to bring that up. We talked about that, does vegetation warrant, being considered a permanent barrier when it could very well die off or be removed at the whim of a property owner?
Well, I appreciate that, and it's very rare that I would say that the staff report might have been better to have contained some information, but maybe a brief paragraph on the architectural treatment, the proposed architecture, even though it's outside our purview, might have been a good thing to have in the report. I saw the elevations, but there was no verbiage to like back that up or relate it, so that would have been helpful. And I do appreciate you considering the point. And I'm done, thank you.
Any other
I guess
questions?
one last point I do want to make. Basically, where staff decided to move in this direction because we wanted to be consistent with how staff has previously treated this situation. And so this is exactly how we have treated other similar situations where if it's not visible vegetation or topography, then it wouldn't be subject to your purview. So this is what the standard practice is, but it's certainly something we can take a closer look at.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Drobish?
Yes, thank you. perhaps the planning commission could ask the council to review and clarify the discrepancy between the historical Secretary of the Interior guidelines and the visible from the street conflict. And I would like to see where at least any structure within a historical district or anything on the resource inventory does come before either historical advisory or the planning commission, and just get that clarified. Maybe a technicality under the conditions, condition number 4, since there's no cooking, it looks like no kitchen in the new addition, they'd have to use the existing one, and it just, condition 4 says meals shall be served only to residents and overnight guests. I'm assuming they can make their own meals. It's not a restriction at all.
If I understand I'm not sure it's a question, it's more of a statement, but yeah, there are no kitchen facilities proposed with this new addition. And there are none that could be installed in that unit or that structure. Under the bed and breakfast code section, the meals must be prepared within the dwelling unit, and there are modifications to the kitchens is not permissible. You can't have a commercial kitchen. The idea is to retain the existing fabric of the building as much as possible, but still provide meal accommodations for guests and people who live on the premises. So I guess if I understand the position, your question, it's no kitchen facilities will be constructed within the, I believe the applicants characterized it well. It's more of a living quarters as opposed to an addition. But that condition should be retained as a reminder to the proprietor that that condition still must be adhered to. So I would keep it.
I had a question when it refers to overnight guests. What if they wanted to have a wedding reception and have daytime guests? Would they be limited to serving food to those people?
Because the bed and breakfast use is very specific, it's overnight accommodations. The holding of weddings on a premises would be an additional use from staff's perspective, and perhaps a modification from this use permit would be necessary in order to accommodate that type of function. Because there are ancillary issues related to a wedding party being present on a location. Number one is parking. Number two, if you've been to the site, you know that the streets are quite narrow, and so having even off-site parking may be difficult, with the exception of street parking or city parking within the parking garage. They're luckily and close enough where that certainly is a possibility, but it is not as advantageous of having parking on the site. So we would have to treat that type of inquiry as an additional use that would come back before you to make a determination whether that use is compatible with not only the neighborhood, but the parameters and criteria under the code.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to get this in before Commissioner Russell groans. Maximum occupancy. Andrew, you just kind of intimated it at something, wedding parties and parking. Okay, so clearly they can't have any activity that would require parking outside what they're offering. Okay, so I think that's clear. But what about maximum occupancy? There's no statement in here to that, and do we get into that? And I was kind of going back to Mr. Drobish's question. He kind of tagged on the overnight, and I thought, what if they want to have afternoon teas? I'm sorry, this is off the subject, but what if they wanted to have afternoon teas with no necessary requirement that you stay overnight, but you could come in for an afternoon tea, and we'll allow up to 7 vehicles to come. Do you see what I'm where I'm kind of getting at? And what is the whole maximum occupancy? You know,
well,
8 people per room. I mean, you know, if you can get into the car, an SUV, a big expedition, you know.
If the tea service was for non-overnight guests, that would be a change in use.
Okay, so overnight's critical then.
that may not be as compatible within the context of the neighborhood. It really isn't a residential or overnight accommodation type event. It's more of a day function. Not to say that it couldn't be done. Perhaps it could be. Thinking about it off the cuff here, yeah, we would probably treat it as a change in use, and it would have to come back before you, or perhaps some compatibility finding.
Final point, and I'll be done, I promise. So there are state codes or statutes, probably codes or regulations, that are specific to bed and breakfast, correct? Is that right?
Generally speaking, a bed and breakfast is considered an expanded residential use.
Right.
So it's residential in nature. These are people, it's overnight accommodations. It's a little more similar to a motel than it would be to some other commercial use. But typically speaking, in most jurisdictions, City of Placerville, it's considered a residential use allowed by a conditional use permit. So when you talk about something like a wedding, yes, sometimes a bed and breakfast can go through the conditional use permit and expand their conditional use permit to allow ancillary uses, weddings or other certain things, under the parameters that would be restricted by the conditions of that permit. As Mr. Painter pointed out, we're going to look at parking, noise, outside entertainment, all that kind of thing. But when you're talking about a bed and breakfast becoming a destination point for a tea house or that kind of a thing, well, that's more of a commercial use. That's not a bed and breakfast use.
Okay.
And so we'd have to look at whether or not that particular kind of use would be even permitted in this particular zone district.
That makes sense. But I thought I took from something Andrew said that there are state regulations or codes that define a bed and breakfast and how it's used and set forth parameters, or did I misunderstand?
He has.
The city does, not the
Yeah.
state.
Yeah, I quoted
Okay.
the code section. Yeah, I think it's 10.4.11.
Okay,
Yeah.
so perhaps maybe just a condition should be, and for all CUPs for bed and breakfast, that they shall be operated in conformance with, and then cite that city code. I would think that would be a condition of use. You got to operate it in the manner that the city sets forth.
That would certainly be a simpler way to condition this project, absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I am done now, I promise.
Any other questions? Commissioner Russell?
I want to make sure Michael's finished. I have a question, and it doesn't really pertain to your project. We're asking all these things, sort of generalities. But condition 2, the proprietor and owner are required to occupy the property. What if there's circumstances, illness or who knows what, that precludes that from happening, that the owners just can't do that anymore for whatever reason? Does that mean that the business or the establishment has to just close its doors, or you can't hire people to do those things and live there if you're not able to anymore?
I believe the intent of that section in city code that outlines this conditional use permit procedure is, again, what Director Rivas is talking about, is that it's to retain the residential component. And this is supposed to be a use that's operated by a property owner. It's specified as a criteria that must be met upon the issuance of the permit. Yes, under your circumstance, it's not out of the realm of possibility that the business may need to close during the time, perhaps when the owner or proprietor can't be present on the property, and maybe the business would need to slow down or cease to or stop operating until such time as that person was able to reside back on the premises. Yeah, unfortunately, that is. I understand your question. I guess everything is relative, and that particular circumstance could be somewhat of a shortfall for this property owner if that were to indeed happen, or to any business operator who operates a B&B here in the city. I don't know how else to reply to that. Maybe perhaps Director.
I can't think of any other businesses that have to be, operated by the owner of the business. Usually they have people that they hire to do those things. It seems to me that this could present a really hardship on a B&B if for some reason, whatever reason, that they can't operate their own business. And if this is going to be looked at someday and tweaked or whatever, I would think that there might be some verbiage that would take into consideration, extraordinary hardship cases or whatever that would permit this to, not to close up.
I might add to that this is really a special circumstance. It's a conditional use. It's not a use mandated or permissive by right in any zone. You must apply for a use permit. Therefore, you must adhere to those standards and related conditions that may be imposed upon that. Perhaps Director Rivas might have additional information or comment.
Yeah, maybe I can add just some additional comment. This is definitely not atypical. The County of El Dorado also has the same requirement. I've worked in other jurisdictions that have had the same requirement. This is a conditional use permit that is basically allowing a bed and breakfast to operate in a residential zone. And so it's a residential area, and so it is a requirement that the property owner reside on the property. I don't think, and maybe Mr. Painter can correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, but I would believe that it wouldn't be outside of the realm should the applicant, say for example, they just become older, that they could seek and expand a revision to the use permit to allow a caretaker or an innkeeper to assist in operating the bed and breakfast. But that is a requirement in the residential zone that the owner live on the premises. And that also assists on maintaining the residential character of the premises. If the owner of the property isn't living there, then you could have a situation where maybe things get a little out of hand. It can fall out for various reasons outside of the, being within the residential character of the area. But that's a typical condition that you would see almost anywhere.
If I may, and I know Commissioner Lowry has a question. If we're going to have more general questions for staff related to changes in the ordinance and that sort of thing, I would suggest that we do that under item 8, so that these nice ladies that have been standing there for 20 minutes have a chance to talk, and we can move forward onto the rest of the agenda. And I'm following up on this just to make it concrete in my mind. So are you telling me that on condition 2, we can't simply put and or in that sentence? Are we prohibited by our zoning ordinance from putting that in there? So it would read, the proprietor and or owner are required to occupy the property.
I'm going to consult the code.
Okay. I think Commissioner Lowry also had a question.
I just wanted to thank you ladies for standing there so patiently while we struggled through our didactics and hypotheticals.
Thank you. I think we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this point, and I know the applicant's standing at the podium. So, excuse me, one second.
If I can
Go ahead, Mr. Painter.
They're standing one more or perhaps 30 more seconds. Yeah, under criteria number 8, I'll read it. The proprietor and owner are required to occupy the property.
Okay.
Period.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if you'd mind stating your name for the record and tell us anything you think we should know about your project.
Oh, okay. My name is Allison Lopridge, and my husband and I run the bed and breakfast. The property is owned by Maggie Smith, my mother, and I'd like to make myself available to answer any questions. We have our family of 6, and this worked out well when we were a family of 3, and now we need a little bit more space. And so we looked at our options and constructing this separate. It's this rectangular 2-story unit, and it'll be kind of attached by a little hallway, breezeway. We'd like to move the family there. And that, in moving the family out, that will, the 2 rooms that we live in now, actually one of them is a large room. It has a non-weight-bearing wall dividing it into a boys' room and a girls' room. So that wall will go and it will be a room, and then my husband and my room. Those 2 would be vacant, and we'd like to convert those into rooms that we can let to the public, in addition to the other 3 we have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant? No? Seeing none, thank you for your time. Is there any other member of the public that would like to address this item? Having heard none, I will close the public portion and bring it back to the commission for discussion. I suppose I cut my questions of staff off short with respect to this overnight guests, it's the same essential question I had for item 2. Is it my understanding the code prevents us from just striking out the word overnight? Can it just be meals shall be served only to residents and guests? I mean, what if their kids are, having a slumber party? I mean, they should be able to serve meals at that point.
I'll quote criteria number 10. Meals shall be served only to residents and overnight guests, period.
All right. Thank you. Discussion on this item from commissioners. Commissioner Drobish.
Maybe just to get discussion started, the driving up High Street is very tight, especially with some on-street parking by some of the homes on High Street there. And the signage says no parking between signs. There's 3 of those. It was kind of confusing. I don't know. It would, if we replace those signs with no parking on this side, as there is next to Ridgeway Manor, what could we do to open up High Street a little bit more? It's awfully tight in there. Maybe some letters to a couple of property owners to trim back the vegetation would open up some of it. I'm concerned. My truck barely got through there. Fire access, a fire truck. If one of the owners on High Street there encroached a little bit more into the road, it might be almost impossible for a fire truck to get up to Wood Street or to the applicant's property. So I don't know if that's possible for the city to change some signage along there. And then I would just request of the applicant along Wood Street to trim some of the vegetation back to the fence line, and that would open up quite a bit. Thank you.
Any other discussion by the commission? Do I have a motion?
I'll move the recommendation that we approve the amended conditional use permit 2001-03 to increase the number of bed and breakfast rooms for let at the bed and breakfast business at 801 Morey Drive. We will incorporate the staff report as part of the public record, making the findings as stated in the staff report, Roman numeral 2, A through C, and approve the amendment to CUP 2001-03 with conditions 1 through 12, including the amendments as submitted this date, modifying the TIM cost from $3,012 to $1,506.
And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Lowry? No? Okay. Seeing none, we'll ask the, call the question, please.
Member Friend.
Aye.
Member Friend, aye. Member Drobish.
Aye.
Member Drobish, aye. Vice Chair Russell.
Aye.
Vice Chair Russell, aye. Member Lowry.
Aye.
Member Lowry, aye. Chair Briggs.
All right.
Chair Briggs, aye.
This decision is appealable to the City Council within 10 days. Thank you. Okay, item 7.2, Marshall Medical Center Campus and Environs, GPA 2012-03, Zone Change 2012-04, Conditional Use Permit 2012-02, and SPR 2012-04, and EA 2012-02. I think we need more letters and numbers in that. We have a staff report, please.
We do, and it could be lengthy.
Excuse me. Excuse me 1 second.
I would like to abstain from this because I had a week-long family reunion and just did not have the time to give 100% to the entire agenda item. So I just want to, I'll just listen.
Thank you. Staff report, please.
Thank you. Good night. This request is made by Marshall Medical Center, and it involves several components. And it perhaps might be easier to address and invite the audience to look behind you. That's figure 1, which is also on page 4 of your staff report. We've enlarged it to show the sub-areas where activity is proposed and requests before you are proposed. It's very difficult to read from here, I'm sorry, but perhaps for you all who are sitting at the dais, they are numbered. And under sub-area 1 contains the area that's entirely owned by Marshall Medical Center. It consists of land that is part of the recent South Wing expansion. It includes the parking areas that are associated with that improvement, landscaping, retaining walls, and other improvements, as well as a parking lot facility located along Washington Street, approximately where Roland Street once was. Again, at this particular sub-area, the Marshall Medical Center is requesting that the land use designation and zoning be amended from what is now a single-family and medium-density land use and zoning designation to business professional. The business professional designation proposed is the same designation that the older portions of the hospital currently have, as well as the parking area, associated clinics, and other buildings in the immediate vicinity. Under Sub-Area 2 is a parcel not owned by Marshall Medical Center, but it includes the business, the Western Slope Medical Center. This center is an I believe it's a 100-room or 99-bed convalescent care facility. Its access is off of Washington Street. It also has a secondary access that connects to Cedar Ravine Road. I don't have the acreage, but I will discuss what's proposed on that particular parcel in a moment. Under Sub-Area 3 is the approximately a 2.5 acre parcel that is partially, has some construction on it, contains a single family home on the western portion of the lot. That lot is bisected by Washington Street. More of the parcel is located on the east of Washington Street, but on the western portion is where Marshall Hospital is proposing to build a 51-stall parking lot, landscaping, drainage, lighting, etc., which I will discuss shortly. On this lot, the western portion of which, again, westerly of Washington Street, Marshall Medical Center is requesting to amend the general plan, land use designation, and zoning from the low-density residential designation and R120 zoning designation to business professional. As I mentioned, under Sub-Area 2 is adjacent to this particular parcel, and both the applicant as well as staff has contacted this property owner as well as the property owner to the west of the Western Slope, and that is the LDS Church, as to whether or not they were interested also to amend their land use and zoning designations for consistency with what's proposed for the parking area that I just described. We did receive comment back from the Western Slope as well as the church, and the owner of the Western Slope property is encouraged by the proposal by the applicant tonight, encourages its approval, and they wish to be part of that zoning and land use designation before you this evening. We did receive also a letter from the Church of Latter-day Saints. They have chosen they do not want to participate in this amendment request, and they respectfully would like to keep their existing land use and zoning designation. The parking lot facility, if the land use approval is granted, then a conditional use permit would be required for the construction and use of that facility. The site plan review kicks in under our code for parking lot facilities. And so therefore the entitlement for a site plan review is also before you this evening. The applicant has provided very detailed information regarding improvements to not only the parking area, landscape, drainage, tree removal, irrigation, but also this project would involve street improvements. And the street improvements involve Washington Street only. And one of the exhibits, I believe it's C4, put it on the wall behind you, shows the extent of the street improvements that would be required with the site plan review component. It would involve widening in various locations. Washington Street, approximately between 2 and 4 feet. This would be required and needed in order to accommodate 2 12-foot travel lanes, as well as provisions for and the installation of street frontage improvements. And what I mean by that are curb, gutter, and sidewalk connecting this satellite parking lot facility to the existing improvements that currently terminate just south of the MCPC building on the campus of the medical center. The review, staff's review of the project, we did analyze the project for potential environmental impacts. That initial study and draft environmental document is part of the public record and as is Exhibit A of your staff report. Specific sections of that report I can go into a little detail at this time. The improvements proposed, again, for the construction of this parking lot facility has the potential to generate dust. And the application of asphalt, both to widen and make the improvements along Washington Street, as well as the pavement and asphalting of the parking lot facility itself, has the potential to cause environmental impacts. However, staff has drafted for your review and recommendation to City Council 2 different mitigation measures, both related to rules from the El Dorado County Air Quality Management District. Rule 223 point 1 relates to fugitive dust. Rule 224 relates to the asphalt paving materials. A second section, Section 5, which is the cultural resource section of the mitigated negative declaration draft. There are 3 different mitigation measures related to cultural resources. One of which involves our staff's consultation with the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, who they have the right under state statute to request consultation when projects involve general plan amendments and zone changes. We sent a request as to whether they wanted to consult. They followed back with a letter in writing. We met with them, former Director Webb and myself, back in January, and that conference or consultation resulted in development of the mitigation measures related to cultural resources that I've described in the staff report in the initial study. A couple of the mitigation under that cultural resources are pretty standard. They relate to the unexpected uncovery of historical artifacts and or human remains. These are standard conditions. Those members who are on the commission would probably see that those are very familiar conditions related to those types of situations. And those were drafted and made part of the initial study for your review this evening. Under the geology section, Section 6, the particular soil classification or soil type for the project site is Mariposa Josephine, very rocky loam. Information from our Soil Conservation Service indicates that this particular soil type has an erosion potential, which is moderate to high. Therefore, staff has added a mitigation measure that the grading plan shall adhere to city standard. Those standards are expected to minimize any impact related to erosion to a less than significant level. Under the noise, again, this is a pretty typical mitigation measure or condition that's imposed upon any construction project where staff is suggesting that we mitigate for noise-related construction activity while this facility is being constructed, limiting the hours when construction activity can occur, limiting those to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. The mitigation goes further to state that no construction is permitted on Sunday, as well as on city and federally recognized holidays. A final section of the initial study that I think warrants some discussion is transportation and traffic, and that is Roman numeral section 16, where the negative deck initial study describes the analysis made by our city engineer and associate engineer of our engineering division related to some public comment we received from neighbors who were concerned about traffic accidents at the intersection of Cedar Ravine and Washington Street, traffic volume, speeding, those types of issues were raised by the public. Those comments are provided for you as, I believe it's Exhibit B of your staff report. The staff also looked at traffic counts that have been tabulated along Washington Street or near the intersection of Washington and Cedar Ravine. And we also looked at police department records as far as accident data. And it was determined by our engineer, Mr. Stong, and perhaps he might have a further comment, but his assessment was that at this time, the request by the neighbors for a three-way stop sign at that intersection is not warranted based on the traffic volume, the accident history, etc. However, they did go further in their comments. Mr. Stong did go further that their staff wishes to and will evaluate that intersection upon the completion of the parking lot facility, and I believe it's 3 months or later after that, to analyze its flow, traffic counts, if there are any accident data that needs to be evaluated at that time, and perhaps some modification to warrant a future restriction of either stopping or some other variant. This project we did provide public notice, not only to this meeting this evening, but also to the environmental document that was circulated. That document did go down to the state clearinghouse for comment. We received no we received no agency comment from state agencies. Public comment, again, was provided for you as made in Exhibit B. One of those comments is worth noting, and that relates to the comment that came to us latest, and it refers to a request by a neighboring property owner regarding the intent originally by Marshall Medical Center was to change the designation for the entirety of Sub-Area 3. Again, that's the 2.5 acre piece that contains the house that would be demolished and the parking lot facility installed and created and constructed. After consulting with them, both staff and the applicant spoke to that property owner, they decided to amend their application so that Marshall Medical Center was only requesting modification to the designation of zoning and land use westerly of Washington Street. And so the easterly portion of that 2.5 acre lot will remain residential in land use and in zoning. And I believe after speaking with that particular property owner who raised that issue, they are very happy about that amendment to the request before you this evening. Going into a little detail about the analysis of this proposed use, consistency with general plan and zoning. Beginning on page 8, I provided analysis of the amendment and zone change. I briefly alluded to the existing BP designation for, I will call, the older portions of the hospital. The proposal tonight, again, under sub-area 1, is to change the designation again for those residential uses to BP. And so therefore, there would be internal and external consistency between both of those properties and land uses. In the BP zone, permitted uses are medical and dental clinics, pharmacies, hospitals, and other similar and compatible uses. In terms of site improvements, staff's review of both the site plan review section, which describes criteria that needs to be evaluated by the Planning Commission. These relates to, in this particular instance, the parking lot facility, The site plan review section would talk about criteria related to landscaping, drainage, access, et cetera. I would be remiss to not note that the parking lot facility will be for Marshall Medical Center employees only. The facility will be gated. There'll be either a key or card entry. The card entry facility structure is on the exhibit behind you to give you an example of what it's going to look like. So it will prohibit non-employees, non-hospital employees from using that location during the hours where this facility will not be used. And the applicant provided a very detailed narrative describing their proposal tonight. They address that issue. They talk about who the parking lot will be intended for. The hospital employees work a 12-hour shift, so there will be several hours of the day where this facility will not be occupied. Similarly, to address concerns raised by neighbors as to the visibility of the parking lot from immediate neighbors. The applicant is proposing a 6-foot-high security fence. This fence will be made out of wood. An elevation of that is on the graphic behind you. Its location within the site plan is shown. It'd be very difficult for me to verbally describe where it's located, but in essence, it is, they're running along both in-property lines, and within 30 feet of the downhill neighbor, the private property in sub-area 4, where that particular neighbor will be somewhat impacted by drainage as well as a relocation of a water line potentially, because their water line transects this parking lot, proposed lot, and the applicant and engineer would like to potentially relocate that to a situation and location where, if it should fail in the future, the costs involved, if it were to remain in its existing condition, it could be very costly for that property owner to repair it or maintain it. By moving it along the property line outside of really the context of the parking area, those costs should be somewhat minimized. I'm going to sum up tonight with basically your role tonight is, since these entitlement requests involve changes to the general plan and zoning designation, but also involve site plan review and conditional use permits. As you may remember, recent code changes mandate that when a project involves both a legislative act and a discretionary act, that the entirety of the project moves forward, and this body serves as strictly advisory, so you're going to be asked to make a recommendation on the entitlements requested tonight. And I provided you with a kind of a roadmap beginning on page 9, where I've outlined some specific findings that we are asking for this commission to make, and then under Roman numeral 3, make recommendations to City Council regarding the land use designation, zoning designation changes, findings for the conditional use permit and site plan review, as well as findings regarding the environmental document. There are a list of conditions that begin on page 12, and these conditions include the mitigation measures. Those are the first several that run until page 14, when they become numeraled conditions, beginning with number 1 and continuing on to page 22 with condition number 48. The applicant and their engineer are in the audience this evening, and I need a drink, so I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you, Mr. Painter. I'll give you a second to catch your breath before I fire questions at you. We'll take a 30-second recess here while Mr. Painter relaxes. Although we do have Mr. Rivas. Yeah, let's go ahead. I'm going to start with the Kingsley water line. So that's a private agreement between that property owner and the hospital. If they want to move that, that's all between them. We don't need to get involved in that at all. Is
Yeah,
that
it's kind of a
correct?
unique situation where this is something if the Kingsley Trust property were to be built today, we typically would not have this cross lateral across someone else's property because of the situation of maintenance. But it is what it is, and I want to certainly congratulate and invite perhaps that question with the applicant or their engineer. But
Wait, I don't
Yeah.
know that we have the authority to force them into an agreement on it as a condition, do we? Force is a poor
we
choice
certainly
of
have some
words.
control over its connection to our city utility
To our
system.
to the city. Okay, that works. Okay.
Perhaps Engineer Stong may have a
But we're not at the public hearing yet. So you guys, we'll let you know. Well, the last applicant was up for 20 minutes. Okay. The stop sign at Washington Street, I heard the staff report state that engineering is going to reevaluate at a later date. I didn't see that as a condition. Did I overlook it?
Well,
really not a condition, it's more of a statement that they.
it is.
Yeah.
We're looking at the forecast for what the traffic will be generated from this parking lot, and it still will not create a warrant for an all-way stop at Cedar Ravine in Washington. So it shouldn't be a condition on this project. What
I see.
that shows in the staff
Okay.
report is just that I will remain ever vigilant and
So the
look
next
at that
project will-
intersection, and if things start to deteriorate, we'll do something about it.
Great. Last question I had, with respect to the Latter-day Saints property, if I'm looking at the map correctly, that parcel will then become the only MDR in an otherwise business professional block. Isn't there a provision in the ordinance which discourages what I would refer to as essentially an island? I mean, there is MDR near there and certainly across the street, but you're making that entire block essentially all business professional except for that one parcel.
I think I understand your question, and it did not go unnoticed by staff. That's why we reached out, and as well as the applicant reached out to that property owner. In a perfect world, that would be what city would want to entertain. That does not necessarily preclude the city council from acting in their own behalf regarding that particular issue, if perhaps the recommendation by this body, I don't know. But that is something that could be done. We did, during the environmental document, I believe, covers that instance, as well as the analysis, and when we sent the project to the Airport Land Use Commission, we had them also, in anticipation of that particular lot being included, they also found that lot would be consistent with the airport land use plan as well. So we do have that behind us, or can be checked off as complied with, but maybe Director Rivas might have an additional comment.
Just in brief, if I may, there's typically 3 ways that a piece of property can have its general plan or zoning looked at for change, and that's either generated by the property owner submitting a formal application to the city, or the Planning Commission can initiate or a resolution of intent to amend the general plan or the zoning ordinance, and the City Council can also do the same. So those are typically the 3 ways, and so if you feel that this is appropriate, there's nothing to say you can direct staff to come back with a staff report and propose resolution of intent, which then you would then vote on. That would then start the formal process to change the general plan land use designation and the zoning on this parcel.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Friend?
Just a couple of observations. The first one being that the proposed action would result in a loss of 10 buildable parcels, by my count. I noticed that the environmental document, the M&D, doesn't deal with potential inventory. It deals with displacing existing populations in our residences and structures, but no concern about what we might be losing in terms of from our housing element perspective? And why, I guess, why isn't that a consideration?
It's a great question. I don't have the environmental document that was adopted for the south wing addition to the hospital and their ancillary improvements, but my recollection is that that particular issue was, at least on the edges, was discussed. Because that's the environmental document that involved the construction activities that occurred that you see today. This particular request is, lack of a better word, more of a cleanup. To be perfectly frank, the city should have imposed this change to the land use at that time because of its consistency issue. So because the applicant moved forward on their satellite parking, and I'll call it satellite because it's detached from the campus, it provides an opportunity to address that omission, lack of a better word, a few years ago. I'm not sure that clearly answers your question, but
it's really an observation. The proposed zoning, business and professions, I believe, is what it would go to. In a classic ideal infill project perspective, the parking lot could actually have apartments over it with parking underneath, right? And you could have residences for people to live in and work at the hospital. That's not proposed, and I'm not going to suggest it as a condition by any stretch. But should the hospital consider doing that in the future, would the zoning allow that?
absolutely.
Okay. All right,
Yeah,
great.
residential units and uses would be permitted on the second floor or above. The ground floor being a business professional use or by default a conditional use such as a parking facility.
Okay. The other,
Absolutely.
on page 4 of the staff report, then again on page 9, we're talking about, we have a total of 33 trees that are removed. I note that there is plantings in the parking lot. And by the way, I am 95% happy with the proposed plantings in the parking lot, but I'm going to make some suggested changes with that.
Yeah.
But there was no discussion that I found, and I do miss things in the report these days, it seems like. I did not note what the net gain or loss is. We're losing 33. There's going to be some replacement, but where does that bring us in terms of a net? Do we have that?
No, I don't have those numbers, but if you want to continue, I can get back with you on that.
Okay.
Delta?
I'd
Sure.
kind of like to know what our
Sure.
net on that is. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions for staff? I want to follow up on that water line issue. I don't see any, well, maybe this is it. Maybe it's item 14, relocate the existing, never mind. I think that's it. Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay, then I'd like to open the public hearing and invite the applicant to the podium. And if you wouldn't mind stating your name and tell us anything you think we need to know about your project.
My name is Dana Rice. I'm the Director of Construction and Engineering at Marshall Medical Center. And I just wanted to say that the hospital has agreed to relocate the water feed to the Kingsley property, so that's not any problem at all. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Any tough questions, I'll refer to the civil engineer because he's the smart one.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Seth Nesbitt. I represent Warren Consulting Engineers for the engineering firm responsible for exhibits and application and the project you see before you. I'd be happy to answer any questions, of course, if you had any for us.
And Mr. Nisbet is a graduate of El Dorado High School, and they're a fine product of their engineering program. Any questions for the applicant or Mr. Nisbet? Commissioner Grobish?
For staff, for clarification, with abstaining, am I still allowed to make comment or ask questions?
Well, technically, an abstention would be from a vote. If you're asking me personally, well, I'll leave it at that.
How about observations?
Then I think it would be appropriate that you do so at the podium.
Okay.
But perhaps that could be at the discretion of your body.
I don't know that there's a hard rule on this. I don't recall seeing one in Robert's Rule of Procedures or in the Brown Act. There may be, but generally, we've allowed commissioners to have discussion on items even if they abstain.
Are you gentlemen in a position to take recommendations regarding the landscape plan? Because I'm getting more of the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, getting more of the sense that you're here from the engineering and technical grading, building, construction aspect as opposed to landscaping and lighting.
That's correct. I could pass along any comments you might have to our landscape consultant, who is a sub-consultant to us. I'd be more than happy to pass that along. So,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Mr. Painter has.
Yes, I have the delta for you regarding trees removed to trees planted. On page 4, it accurately states that 33 trees are to be removed. The parking lot facility will install 32.
Lost one.
Assuming that, does that include the red bud? Are those considered trees? We'll debate that later, but thank you for that.
It's an ongoing discussion.
I'm glad that in the report, it didn't say how many extra trees were coming in, and I missed it, so.
Okay, do we have any?
Do you know the diameter of the tree that you're referring to?
Huh?
If it's 7.5 inches or less, it's not considered a tree under our tree ordinance.
And I think the red bud wouldn't qualify as a tree.
All right, do we have any other questions for the applicant?
No, that was my question, and we'll have staff convey that as well. Sure. Thank you very much.
Any other commissioners? No? Any other members of the public wishing to address this item?
My name's Charles Bishop. I live at 3322 Washington Street. And to address your issue on the water line to the Kingsley property, that was put in many years ago because there was no other place to take and put a water line, and that was the only place that the city had water. Nothing was on Cedar Ravine past Darlington Street, and so it could not take and be serviced. That water line has been there for 30 years. Now, if you want to change it, you're going to have to take and make some new water lines up Cedar Ravine. That's the only way that you're going to be able to do it. It's fine where it is. It shouldn't bother you people a bit. In other words, in putting it there, or Marshall Hospital, in any way, shape, or form. But, in other words, if it has to be serviced, then there will have to be some recommendations of how they should service it. But that is how it was done and why it's there.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to address this item?
Yes, I live on the corner of Glory Road and Washington Street, so my mailboxes will be on the property, or probably that they have on the south side, north side, east side, west side, across from where the lot's going to be.
Okay.
On the east side. Of course, I would rather not have it there at all, but I realize that the hospital needs the parking, and as long as they don't rezone the other side, which is all residential, I would rather the whole street be residential, although it would be nice to have a new street and sidewalks. But we've lived there, have had that house for around 30 years, and there have been head-ons there. I don't know if you gentlemen actually went and looked at the property, because it's a slope on our side and it goes down on the other side. So the thought of building apartment buildings above the parking lot is absurd, and I would try to get rid of the whole thing if that was going to be the case, and evidently they can do it if they want to do it. Also, Washington Street sign down on Washington Street, you can't see it coming up Cedar Ravine. So I wish that you would get a couple of signs showing Washington Street so people can see it. And would it be possible to get at least a speed bump down there to slow the traffic down? We have everyone from Upper Placerville taking this route down and back. And we have a heck of a lot of traffic there. And of course, now we're going to have the parking lot there. And one other thing, I was informed that this meeting would start at 7 o'clock, so I have no idea what you started and said before I got here. But that's what I want to say right now, and I guess that's it.
You missed a bed and breakfast discussion.
Oh, is that it?
And boy, did we chew up the scenery.
These meetings did used to start at 7, beginning in March of this year. They started at 6. And just so you're aware, city council meetings are also at 6.
It says 7.
Does it say 7?
If I may, my name is David Flietti. I reside at 3151 Rice Court, which is on the upslope side of the east side of the street. And into that gentleman's response to Joellen's question, the letter we received from the city did state 7 o'clock. And if you notice, all you gentlemen, and all you gentlemen were here, yet the public, which are the people that are going to be most affected, were not notified that there was a change. I'd like an answer as to why, if it happened in March, what date did the letter go out, Joanna, and why was the public not updated on that when this meeting started and all participants were aware except the public?
Well, we'll address that with staff. Do you have anything else you want to say about the project?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'd like to address, I can't read your names from here. It's a yes, sir. Your answer as to, or your question as to why it wasn't zoned, and this gentleman's response was that it should have been rezoned at the time that Marshall Medical made the south wing. However, at that time, that was still private property. It was not owned by Marshall Medical, so it could not have been rezoned at that time. So I don't understand your response to that gentleman when he said, well, why are you rezoning it from residential? And then why Marshall didn't do it at that time. It wasn't possible. It was a private property, that 2.5 acre project. So you're kind of misleading them in that response, because the property was purchased by Marshall after the south wing was completed.
We'll discuss that when we bring it back for the commission to
Okay.
have a dialogue about.
A question, Mr. Painter, is that on the east side of Washington, D.C., is there going to be any are there going to be any sidewalks on that side? Is all the activity going to be on the west side of Washington Street?
Sir, you need to address the
I'm
chair,
sorry.
and he would direct the question to me.
Okay.
And just so you know, what we normally do, we get the input from the public.
Right.
We address 99% of the public questions we'll address when
According
we
to
go
the
back.
plans now, is there any sidewalk, drainage, anything going to be done on the east side of Washington Street, the upslope where Glory Road is?
I can't give you a direct answer to that question.
It was on the plans. Yeah, you all have the plans in front of you, so someone's got to know. Next question is, as relates to the fire hydrant that is on the east side of Washington Street. Is that going to be relocated, or is that going to remain in place? And then my last question has to do with the traffic situation. I, as well as the other neighbors here, are extremely concerned about the traffic. We do have a four-way stop at Darlington and Cedar Ravine, which is a very minor intersection, yet the intersection at Cedar Ravine in Washington, which has by far more cross traffic, is not four-way. I would strongly urge that you reconsider the four-way stop there. I also am quite concerned that from the project location, from there down to Cedar Ravine, if that is not going to be widened, again, as Joellen said, if you actually took a look at the site, you'll see there is an upslope. It's very narrow. There's a lot of missed accidents there. Maybe the traffic reports don't show that there are accidents, but there are a lot of missed accidents. We come off of Glory Road, and we have to be extremely careful when we either make a right turn or a left turn onto Washington Street, because the traffic is very speedy. There is nothing slowing the traffic down at all in front of that new parking lot consideration. Is there going to be a stop sign at Glory Road to slow this traffic down? I really strongly urge you to take a look at that, because it is a hazard. That right now the street is very narrow. You're going to widen it, but still it's not. That actually is going to encourage people to go much faster. So I really think that's really all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Carla Kingsley, so my parcel is the Kingsley Trust, which is the one that's probably most impacted by this project. I've already had the plans from Seth and talked to them several times. I think that I speak for most of the residents nearby when I say that the stop sign that we need downhill on Cedar Ravine at that Washington intersection is really desperately needed. I live right below that, and in the mornings it starts at 4:30 to 5. Big rigs, trucks. I mean, it wakes me up every morning, and it goes until 10 or 11 every night. Now, I've lived in this county for 40 years, and it's changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know where all the people are coming from that scream down Cedar Ravine, but it really, with the addition of the parking lot, it's going to be extremely dangerous. I almost get hit 3 or 4 times a week trying to get out of my driveway because it's a blind curve coming down there, and the people are coming so fast downhill. There's a stop sign going uphill there and nothing down. So it doesn't make sense to me because they really get a run at it coming all the way down from Country Club Drive at the top. So please consider that. Very important. And then the Washington Street residents also asked if they could have a few speed bumps, you know, coming out to that with the additional flow coming from the parking lot and the hospital with the new wing. So it's just a lot of traffic that you're adding. I think my other 2 points that I wanted, I think maybe should be taken up directly with Marshall, with Dana, or because it's asking them to just sign a little agreement to return my property after they finish my drainage and my water line to the pre-construction condition. Would that be something I'd just deal with them, or would you like a copy of that to discuss? Dana? Okay. Okay. Stop sign's really important, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're going to have to put up with me again. My name is Charles Bishop.
Can I ask you to wait in case anybody else wants to speak first?
Go ahead.
Okay, it looks like you're the man.
How about that? We're, in other words, basically 3323 Washington Street. It is not within your parameters, but it is the first residence on the east side of Washington as you come off of Cedar Ravine. They have no way except to back onto Washington Street to take and get out. They don't have a place to turn around. These people have real problems because Washington Street, as they say, is very narrow and people come barreling up it and they're right there. So thinking about a stop sign is very pertinent in this situation. It is also pertinent for the simple fact that you can't see up Cedar Ravine very far when you're turning on to Washington Street. And it will help in both instances. And I urge you to take this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other members of the public wishing to address this item? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Come on up.
Well, I just hope all of you gentlemen are very sweet. It would be wonderful to have the sidewalk, the city pay for the sidewalk to go all the way down to Cedar Ravine, because we do have school children that come that way. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other members of the public? All right, now seeing none, I'll close the public discussion and bring it back to the commission for discussion. And to the gentleman's question regarding the sidewalk, there is no sidewalk on the east side. So who would like to start the ball rolling on this, commissioners?
Well, I'm going to return to my two previous comments. First, I want to note that I miscalculated. I believe there are 22 parcels that are up for rezoning, not 10. And that number jogs my memory going back. We had the housing element, I think, a couple of months ago. And if I recall, and I'm usually not very good at this, but it seemed like there were 450 buildable parcels left in the city limits, right? 450? Well, 22 starts to become a percentage that's more than ledger dust. And so I'm just going to state that for the record. I would actually request that staff note that in the report when it goes to council in terms of the number of parcels that are buildable parcels that would be lost by the action and what percentage that represents of the buildable parcels. I just think that's germane.
Perhaps I can address that question or that position at this moment.
Yeah, it's like 5%.
The issue regarding, I assume you're referring to sub-area 1, the parcels in sub-area 1?
Yeah, well, I probably didn't discriminate. I was going off of this exhibit right here
Okay.
and looking at every single parcel
The
that
applicant
has a
provided that, yeah.
change from MDR, LDR to BP, and
Right.
simply just did the counting.
The removal of those structures that some of which were part of the Marshall South Wing project were entitled many years ago under a different housing element. Therefore, I think your position is moot as it relates to our current housing element or our updated one, which we're about to bring forward. I don't think that's an issue here. The only lot that would be removed from inventory would be the one containing the single-family home, because that would be entitled, if granted, the removal of that structure and the installation and installment and construction of a parking lot. The other lots, as I mentioned, part of sub-area 1. Sub-area 1 entirely was acquired by Marshall Hospital prior to the construction of the South Wing. To clarify a position by a speaker that I just heard, under sub-area 3, the 2.5 acre piece, it is true that Marshall Hospital recently purchased that site, and it was right after their purchase that they approached the city about this particular project involving this satellite parking lot. Hopefully that clarifies that.
That actually helps a lot.
And
That puts it in a good perspective.
as my understanding, based on what Director Rivas had stated previously, that even though they didn't own it at the time, they still could have filed the correct application with the city, and the city, if it wanted to act on it, could have done a notice of intent to rezone and moved forward at that point.
True.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry,
ahead.
my other, I don't think this one, well, I'm referring to this exhibit up here, the parking lot landscape.
Landscape plan? Sure.
Yeah, so, sorry, if I remember my direction. First of all, again, I want to reiterate that I'm really happy to see, in general, what's laid out here. And I was evaluating this from kind of a estimating of the sun's travel and where we get shading. It always frustrates me when they build parking lots and the lot's oriented and the trees are planted such that the only thing that ever gets shaded are the planters the trees are in, and all the vehicles and the pavement sitting in the sun. And it's like, if you simply reoriented this and gave some consideration to a, easterly, westerly travel, then it would make everybody a lot happier. Now, there are a number of red buds on the eastern edge, 1, 2, 3, 4, that are proposed there, and there's only 2 large trees on that side. And so I would strongly like to suggest that we dispatch with the red buds and put 3 more large trees in there instead to provide shade. And if you want to fill it in with some red bud, that's fine, but I'd like to see trees there as opposed to the red bud.
That could certainly be a recommendation that moves forward to the city council. Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all.
Further discussion by commissioners?
I don't think you guys have any, right. I don't think the applicant has any problem with that exchange either.
Commissioner Lowry?
Yeah, I'll be brief because this is tangential to this decision. But like Commissioner Frem, you know, I see housing units disappear under more intense development, and that's just a fact of life. I would hope that we keep our eye on the ball for, you know, as we kind of speculated on a mixed use for this parcel 12 here, you know, as we think about how we might repurpose our highway commercial areas to really think in terms of and encourage thoughts along the lines of multi-use. You know, I could see Broadway, Upper Broadway being a little Santana Row, for instance. That's all.
Yeah, I could briefly speak to that. Director Rivas and I recently, I won't disclose the location, but we have spoken with a developer, current property owner of a shopping center here in town, and they are looking at building a new pad. Staff did suggest that to them. At this point, I don't know what their they haven't submitted formal plans yet, but that was something we did address with them as the potential for residential units up above a commercial venture. So that is something we do, and we will continue to do so because that is one of our goals and policies in the general plan. Absolutely.
Commissioner Russell?
Just a general comment. I think we ought to use this parking lot, the landscaping there, as an example of how all new parking lots that go into the city should be shaded. This is probably going to be one of the best in the city, and we've got some, you know, huge parking lots that have no trees at all, and I think this is really going to be a good example of what can be done.
Yeah, I can add to that. I was encouraged after seeing the plan of their willingness to actually plant larger than normal. We're talking about 24-inch box or larger size, which is quite rare for a developer to do that. So I you know, kudos to the designer. Absolutely.
What you just said reminded me of something. I think using a 24-inch box redbud is really an overkill. You know, I think they could have put a little smaller redbud in. There's two kinds of redwood, western and eastern, and the eastern does assume more of a tree shape eventually.
It is.
It's on.
Is,
I may be dead.
I'm dead. Anyway, I you know, if there's any trade-offs,
turn yours on.
removing the redbud for some of the other trees, that'd be fine. But I think a 24-box redwood is really an overkill.
Okay.
Sorry, it's out. I should have used this.
Commissioner Drobish?
If I could ask a question of staff, the egress, the entrance and exit to this parking lot, is that going to be elevated up to road height to improve line of sight?
Yeah, it's on.
That might be a question for carrying back to allow him to speak.
Your mic's on.
Yes. So the drive entrance, it is at the same obvious elevation as the road, and the idea was to not slope it severely to where you can see the gates from the road. We are aware that when you do pull into the driveway, if you don't realize you can't enter, you do have to back out in the roadway. But part of our thinking was with the gate as close to the roadway as we could, leaving enough room for a vehicle to stand and not block a sidewalk. It was close enough to the road, and with proper lighting, you could effectively see that there's a gate there and not pull in there unless you knew you could get into it. So the need for a turnaround, because the parking lot wasn't as large, and a full turnaround for a vehicle wasn't warranted in this case. The exit, once again, the gate is very close to the sidewalk, so a standing vehicle inside, right behind that gate, has full clearance in both directions to see oncoming cars, yes. So if that answers your question effectively.
And how detrimental would it be to your project, the mature 24-inch oak in the upper tier, to shift your planting island to its location and to save it?
You're referring to the large oak tree that's directly to the, I guess it would be south of the driveway? Is that the
Yeah, it's
tree you're
pretty
referring
much
to?
centered in your project.
That tree is, if I recall, that tree is quite large, and any improvements we would do around it would have to be far enough away. It would kill the tree anyway. So realistically, the driveway couldn't fit really anywhere in there, and still have that tree survive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to address a couple items that we haven't got to yet. I'd first like to, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this right now, note that our agenda packet does have the correct time of 6 p.m., and we've had many discussions with staff since I've been on the commission about, notice and making sure notice is always done correctly. I don't know whether it was or was not here, and I don't really care because these folks managed to get here and say their piece, but I know Commissioner Friends stated many, many times that this commission particularly feels that public input, and I know staff does as well, that the public input's highly important. And so if there was an error in the notice that the public gets, and the public has to realize we don't get that notice, we never see it for the most part. But if there was an error, that staff take proper steps to prevent that from occurring in the future. But I want to talk about the sidewalk. There's been questions as to, well, the question hasn't been asked. I'm going to ask the question. Why is there no sidewalk on the east side of Washington Street?
The current pedestrian demand is anticipated to be along the west side, and typically a project is asked to construct frontage improvements along its frontage. In this case, the parcel spans both sides. However, the existing infrastructure is on the west side, and the thought is that it will connect the lot to the main campus, and it actually is a longer frontage. If you look at, it's constructing sidewalk along more than its frontage on the adjacent parcels. So in the thought of fairness, it was not considered a condition.
Okay. There's been a lot of discussion about speed bumps and a stop sign. I've driven over there enough times. I like to play frisbee golf over at Lions Park, and it's funny. A lot of folks I know do exactly what these people said, which is they come down Cedar Ravine, go up Washington Street, shortcut to get over to the Broadway section. It actually knocks a couple minutes off. So I'd just like to get input from other commissioners about whether they think that a stop sign or speed bumps would be appropriate. I understand staff's position on it, but I'd like to know what you guys think. Mr. Drobish?
I would absolutely think that a stop sign, a full stop to slow down the downhill into town would be warranted, because as fun as it is to come down that road as fast as you can, it is extremely dangerous and tight in there. The only thing you might want to think about speed bumps, as I remember being a passenger in an ambulance and driving down the previously potholed street, and every little bump just killed. So I don't know if instead of a full speed bump, we can go with the speed dots or whatever they're called, just the little rumble bumps, if that would help people. But a stop sign would potentially save lives, I'm thinking.
Mr. Rivas may remember the discussion of vertical deflection devices long ago and far away, AKA speed bumps.
Mr. Russell?
This morning when I was reviewing the whole project in the area, as I got down to Cedar Ravine on Washington, right at the stop sign, I ran out of gas. And I had to call my wife, and she had to bring gas to me. So I sat there for probably about a half an hour watching the traffic go up and down. And the cars coming down the street, down Cedar Ravine, are going quite fast. I can't dispute that at all. and people were coming out of Washington, and they had to be pretty careful if there were cars coming down, because sometimes you think the car is 200 yards up there, but if they're coming fast enough, that closure rate is pretty quick. I also noticed just, that the cars going up that were supposed to stop at the stop sign on Cedar Ravine, probably 1 out of about 10 would actually come to a stop. Some of them rolled through slowly, some of them rolled through quite fast, So I think some attention, whether it's now or 3 months from now, really needs to be directed at that intersection, because I think it potentially really could be a problem.
Commissioner Lowry?
Yeah, I'm talking, Commissioner Drobish's comment about, what I've heard called rumble strips with the bots dots arranged in a rectilinear fashion to kind of remind you where you're driving, are much preferable to speed bumps. Also, maybe when this issue lands in the city council agenda, the city council could ask the chief of police to consider doing some additional radar enforcement in that downhill direction from Cedar Ravine. Could have a couple of beneficial effects. One, it might give them an opportunity to see just what the speed levels are there customarily, and if it can be mitigated by traffic enforcement short of a stop sign.
I'll just make the final comment on the stop sign. I'd generally be supportive of it. We have stop signs now at the Spring Street intersection up there, which I really can't stand because I didn't think they were necessary. But if the city feels they're necessary there, I absolutely would think they would be necessary down at Washington Street. And every time I drive through there, I always think, why isn't there a stop sign right here? And I don't know that there's a good answer for it, but I would be in support of a motion that included that. And with that, do we have any further discussion on this item? Do I have a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. However, let me just quickly find where I want to add this 13A. So I'll move that we recommend to the City Council that they accept the proposal for the rezoning of the parcels and change in the conditional use permit as specified in the staff report, item 7.2, and that we incorporate the staff report as part of the public record, including all the exhibits and figures, with the findings as specified, Roman numeral 2A and B, and the recommendation to City Council, Roman numeral 3, A and B, and C, D through F, and then adopting the mitigated negative declaration mitigation measures as specified, accepting the conditions from the various departments, Engineering Division 1 through 13, with 13A being the installation of a stop sign in the northerly direction of Cedar Ravine at Washington. Water system, sewer facilities, and drainage facilities as specified, roadways and grading as specified. Takes us through condition 44, and then with regards to planning 45 and 46, adding condition 45A to replace the proposed red bud on the easterly portion of the parking lot with either 3 additional the trees currently shown in the landscaping plan, or giving consideration for ponderosa pine or incense cedar or some other signature type tree, and then the fire district conditions 47 and 48.
I'll second. Any further discussion?
For the record, was that Chair Briggs?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Call the question, please.
Member Friend.
Aye.
Chair Briggs.
Aye.
Vice Chair Russell.
Aye.
Member Lowry.
Aye.
This,
Member Drobish.
oh, excuse me.
Just for the record.
Abstain.
Thank you.
These recommendations will be forwarded to the city council for consideration at their next regularly scheduled meeting, which is,
That will be the 13th of August.
The
So
13th
we
of
anticipate
August.
this item, although at further notice, but we need to check with admin. But yeah.
thank you. Okay, item 8, matters from commissioners and staff. Do we have any matters? It looks like we have 8.1 and 8.2 to be determined, so I'll turn that over to staff.
8.1, yes, cancellation of the next meeting due to National Night Out. It gives you an opportunity to go participate in your local communities and neighborhoods, National Night Out activities. Also, I want to very enthusiastically inform the commission as well as the public who is leaving the building at the moment that you as a commission are probably aware that your sister committee, the Historical Advisory Committee, assisted with the creation of an application to be submitted to the American Council of Historic Preservation and for a designation as a Preserve America community. This morning, I was very pleased to receive an email from that organization, and we have been now designated as such a Preserve America community. At some time in the near future, we will have a proper proclamation to that effect, likely involving City Council, other dignitaries. We will certainly invite you all. It may involve also Historical Advisory Committee, obviously, due to their involvement. So without going into other great details, but I do want to make that announcement. Also, one of the items that came before you at the last meeting was the entitlement extension request, and that will be heard on the 13th of August as well. And we didn't discuss what member within this body might be willing to attend in order to provide. I'm seeing some fingers pointing in different directions.
What was the date again?
The second Tuesday in August, so the 13th.
Yeah, I know you did. I'm just checking my calendar.
Availability.
Okay.
Well, I could do it too, but if you want to go, be my guest. All right. Okay. So it's August 13th at what time? 10th. Is it 10th?
Yes, it's at 6 p.m. in this building, and
Okay.
unless otherwise noted. Director Rivas, I don't have the date, but the workshop regarding the Form 700, that is coming up. I don't have the details. I know Member Drobish and I have spoken about it. Do you remember the date and time? It's in this building.
I have that letter on my counter, and I can't recall the exact date. The council had discussed an early meeting for like maybe the city and an afternoon meeting for the county. I don't know how that finaled out, but
we can get back to you, either myself or Director Rivas, regarding that. It certainly is important material, and we'd encourage you to attend. That's all I got.
Thank you. Any other communications from commissioners?
Well, I'd just like to bring us back then to the item we had earlier this evening. And there were two things actually synthesized out of that. One dealt with the bed and breakfast code, the city code, and I think there were some suggestions that we might be able to do some clarification on that. I think the real issue, and Commissioner Russell kind of picked up on it, that it certainly doesn't seem like if a property owner hires someone to live on the property and be there 24/7 as the proprietor, because it says proprietor and owner, that could work, I would think. So at some point, and I realize you folks have a lot to do, but we should perhaps pull that code out
and go through it, and maybe clean that up a little bit, and then deals with the serving of the meals and so on and so forth. And then the other thing that came up tangentially in that whole agenda item dealt with the buildings in the historic district and modifications, even if we can't see them at the time, and certainly with regards to what would be considered temporary barriers, i.e. vegetation and so on and so forth, that we might want to raise the bar on that. So just refer those to staff for some consideration at a future point.
So on
Yeah.
that topic, as I recall, there's a third term in here along with proprietor and owner, and that's innkeeper. So a hired person. My sense of the rulemaking around bed and breakfast was to keep it within the realm of an owner proprietor, especially with regard that it's a privilege to operate a revenue business in a residential district, especially given the fact that you're adding, vehicle trips and strange people in the neighborhood and that sort of thing. I think the restrictions are probably there for good reasons.
Just a comment on Placerville winning the Paint What Matters contest. Two California cities. So, as I recall, we do not really have a say in colors that might be used. So hopefully good taste will prevail throughout.
Yeah, nor do I believe that they have to consult with the city whatsoever. So I think they're going to contact the individual business owners. Yeah.
That's a lot of Navajo white.
I think from our perspective, we would certainly hope that they do an inventory of those properties that desperately need it and decide to help those. That there are, especially noticed during our tour. I think I even referenced there was a couple of with peeling paint and whatnot. Yeah, so there's a need out there, absolutely.
Okay, and with that, I will adjourn our meeting to August 20, 2013 at 6 p.m. Thank you.